And now we're going to welcome, we're going to welcome Chantal Bilodeau. I think she's connected with us from Climate Change Theatre Action. Chantal, oh, you're with us. Okay. Welcome to Milan virtually.
Thank you.
And
It's very nice to be here
today. So we will also have Chris Thorpe in a moment, but maybe he's connecting. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Hiya. Hello.
Thanks for being with us. And I will start with Chantal, though. Climate Change Theatre Action. We have been looking into how we work with data as scientists, how we work with data in terms of data visualization. And now we're moving into a form of climate communication, which goes through theater. We heard and we listened to the monologue written by Chris Thorpe. Chantal, how do you work? First of all, what is the Climate Change Theatre Action? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yes, Climate Change Theatre Action is an initiative that happens every other year. So it's taking place this year in 2021. We commission 50 playwrights from around the world to write a short play, like the one you just saw, based on a prompt. And then we take this collection of plays and we make them available to anyone who would like to organize an event in their community within a certain time window that's in the fall to coincide with the United Nations COP meetings. So we create a bit of a movement that makes everyone who participates feels like they're having a bigger impact than if they were just doing something small on their own in their own community.
Right, and who are the main players, I should say, but the main actors of this movement? So who are the people who get involved and want to do something about that?
It tends to be a lot of universities participate, whether they have professors have students read plays in their class or present shows on campus or sometimes even off campus. Theaters, of course, but also environmental organizations, faith groups. Sometimes, like you're doing today, there will be a play that's integrated as part of a conference. Every year we get people who want to participate that we didn't expect, like it gets bigger and bigger.
And how do you work with them? And then I'm coming to you in a second, Chris, but just I'm curious about the methodology that you're using, Chantal. What's the process? How you do actually support these people? Maybe some of them have done some theater already, maybe some haven't. So how do you work with them directly?
Yeah, it's meant to be as flexible as possible. So you can do it with a lot of resources, or you can do it with no resource. I think it's with 5 minutes, it's easy for anyone to pick up a play and read it. It's not like you have to think about doing something that's an hour long. And the way we support people, we keep in touch, in close communication, and we put all of the events on our website. We publicize them on social media. Then we gather feedback afterwards to see how it went. And people who need a little bit more support were there on email to answer any questions.
Okay, so here we're talking about a different type of ingredient than what we talked before. We talk about the data, about the need of putting the data in graphs. So here we're talking more about the stories or the words that people want to use, right? To either communicate or enact or foster some type of action. And Chris Thorpe, it's very important to reflect also on the words. I mean, we're very careful when we discuss data. The data need to be very precise and very accurate, but words need to be accurate too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not only do we need, accurate data and accurate words, but I think something that I think about a lot is we need accurate form. We need to fit the purpose of the change we want to make around things like climate to the medium that is being used. And I guess this particular piece that I wrote, I was asked to do it at a time when I was in the middle of writing a new text for the Royal Court Theatre in London, which deals specifically with the psychology of reactions to the climate crisis and the role of theatre in being sort of helpful within that. So, yeah, I'm thinking a lot about, when I write things like this, about being very specific with my language about specific aspects of that reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one issue that we discuss a lot on the media, at least certainly in this country, which is the type of language that media sometimes use to discuss about climate, and the fact of trying very often to be on a sensationalist sort of side, or use alarm or emergency type of tones, right? And we know now that that's kind of language is probably not that effective in allowing people to feel that they can do something. Did you see this changing in years, or did you see any change in terms of the awareness about the importance also of this type of language? Chris, sorry, and then I'm going back to Chantal.
I think there's been I mean, I can only really speak for sort of theatre and, you know, a little bit for film rather than the media in general. I think there is a zeroing in at the moment, a really healthy one in theatre, on the kinds of experience it can provide that will be useful. I think we've been through a stage of alarmism, you know, desperately trying to tell everyone there is a problem through theatre. I think we've been through a stage that we're still in a way, where theatre thinks that telling stories, because that's what it thinks of itself as good at, you know, telling the classic kind of play set 50 years in the future, where a family get together in a house that is being slowly lost to the sea, the kind of allegorical kind of play, or the play that is, you know, set in a moment of crisis and explores the response to that disaster through a group of characters. You know, we're going through the storytelling phase, and I think we're coming to a healthier phase, particularly when we're starting to think about things like the potential of social and civilizational collapse, where theatre is seeing itself as a place where people can come, they can take some time, and they can, almost as a thought experiment, examine the possible range of psychological reactions to the changes that we're currently going through in a way that allows the audience to leave with maybe slightly more options in terms of their own personal way of navigating through this usefully. So, for example, one of the things that I'm interested in theatre saying is, let's take as a fact, for the time that we're here in this room, that civilization as we know it is going to fundamentally change, and that the infrastructure around us is going to disappear. How do we then prepare ourselves psychologically to be useful in that scenario, rather than paralyzed or despairing? You know, so that's the shift that I see, particularly in theatre.
Do you see a similar shift, Chantal? You have, in the experience you've been going through, the type of people who've been evolving in this particular movement? Did you see a change of attitude, a need of focusing on a more proactive, maybe, or a more reflexive sort of way than the emergency that we were facing years ago as the main topic?
I'm actually a little envious of Chris and the UK, because in North America, we're still years behind in terms of what's happening in the theater in relation to climate change. I think there is more, certainly, especially in the last 2 years, but we're still catching up. Here, there is still a lot of dystopian and focus sort of on the crisis, and there is a lot of, I think, education and learning that has to happen for artists to start to look towards the future and what has to happen and how we want to be in that future. But building on what Chris said, I think one of the things that theater is so good at is when you sit in the audience, you get to practice a kind of life that you don't have, right? For an hour or two, your brain is processing a story the same way it would process an experience that you were having yourself. So you get to practice having certain values. You have to practice having certain emotions. And then you can go out into the world and see if that practice was useful and if you want to apply it to your real life.
Right. What kind of people are involved in the type of experiences you are leading, Chantal? What kind of, as you said, like they're very different, but I'm also wondering in terms of maybe age or type of community they come from. Is very varied the type of interest or?
It's pretty wide because we have middle schools, you know, kids who are 13, 14, 15 who participate. And we've had people who are Quakers, you know, part of a faith community, and who have groups who meet regularly who tend to be older. The one common thread, though, is that, of course, these are people who are already interested and concerned about climate. And so the goal for us, I feel, is not to, sometimes people ask me like, oh, but how do you reach people who don't care, who don't, you know, who don't believe in climate change or anything like that? And I say, well, if they don't, they're not going to go see a play anyway. So we're not trying to reach them. What we're trying to do is to reach people who are already concerned and who may find comfort in. One of the comments I get a lot is like, oh, I didn't know there were so many people in my community who had the same values, the same concerns. So there's a sense of getting people together that's really important. And also we're trying to encourage people wherever they are in their journey to take one more step and become that much more engaged.
Right. So my last question is for Chris, which is, in many countries, Italy is one of them, theaters have been strongly impacted by the pandemic, right? And there wasn't even any more this space. I mean, it's only reopening now, the space where we can actually go back to the theater and maybe even being involved in the labs in theater and so on. Do you think that this experience maybe is even opening up a little bit more of space or need for that type of reflection you were talking about? Are we becoming more aware maybe that the crises are connected or not? What's your take on that? Let's see. Is there an opportunity or not?
It's a really interesting, you know, is there any value in terms of climate, you know, preparing ourselves for the coming decades in what we have been through in the past year and a half? I would say yes, as long as it doesn't cause us to overestimate our own resilience and the journey that we need to go on. You know, it has to be said that the last 18 months globally has been incredibly difficult, you know, for different places at different times in that 18 months. You know, Italy being one of the places most badly affected early on, you know, in that. But I think we can take models of that, of like specific local interactions and projects that have maybe fostered a sense of community resilience. But I don't think we can see the pandemic as a whole as a rehearsal for climate change and the potential effects of, you know, the serious changes that we're already in, because I think frankly the pandemic's a lot smaller. So we can't fool ourselves that it is a rehearsal for something bigger, because what is coming is potentially so much bigger that actually this has only tested us to a far smaller extent.
Right. Do you have a comment on that, Chantal, as well? I don't know, from your American perspective, do you see these experiences having taught us something, also in the view that Chris was mentioning now, maybe not to become too optimistic about our way and ability to actually fight something?
Yes, definitely. However, on the practical end of things, I think we have learned things like we don't need to travel all the time to talk to each other, which is I think it would have taken us much longer to learn that hadn't been for this crisis. But I agree with Chris that everybody was unprepared, and we've had years to prepare for what's happening with climate change, and we can't, I'm hoping that we're not going to go through something like what we went through in the last 2 years, where all the unpreparedness and the failures of institutions was so apparent.
I think just to finish that as well, I agree with you, Chantal, that we have learned specific things. And one of the specific things that we've learned is the value of swift and clear government intervention, in response to a specific moment of crisis. We've learned that governments can move faster than they have been telling us they're able to. And I think that's a really clear lesson to carry forward into things like the COP26 and the and all the meetings that are about to happen.
Okay, so let's hope that more reflection will take place and more ability on our side also to face, such a bigger challenge. I totally agree with Chris. So Chris Thorpe and Chantal Bilodeau, thank you so much for being with us today. Climate Change Theatre Action and Chris Thorpe.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.